Van Beck sends his regrets. What happened, it was not his wife. They are hosting an international family at Vanderbilt. One of the children was hit by a car, and they did not speak English, and the interpreter that lives with them wasn't in town, and they were panicking, so he just did a U-turn and went back home, but he said he would be back, so we appreciate that. Tonight's program, I'll give Randy the credit for it. He talked about it because he's been there. And so when I called the museum, I got a very nice return call from this gentleman, Mr. Deig, and he's coming forward to give us information about the museum. When he's done, I'll introduce the next set of people, which are kind of special to me. But don't forget next month, our program's in the back, General Patton's driver's daughter. And I think it'll be most interesting. So welcome, Mr. Deig.
Thank you very much. It's a good crowd. I love your facility. This is great for this. This is a great venue for something like this. So it's was blessed to hear from Steve when he called, and we're excited about what we're doing. We're excited about that there's people interested in what we're doing. We've only been open for a year, just a little bit over a year. We moved into an empty building about a year ago. It was actually a hangar before we moved in. It's out at the Evansville airport, actually on airport property. But I wanted to just give you an update on what the museum is about, and we'll talk just about a little bit about the history of it and how it's put together. And so, something less than 30 minutes, and then I'll turn it over to Mark. We've got the Evansville Wartime Museum. It's part of our story is we talk about the Army at home and what it took to feed the armies abroad. So that's what the basic part of the presentation is all about. So if I just read from it, the vision of the Evansville Wartime Museum is to become a destination for people of all ages, not just those that were in war, okay? Creating an educational and a rewarding environment, illustrating general military history and specific focus on Evansville and the surrounding community's contribution to the supporting of the World War II effort. So a lot of people think it's just about World War II. It's more than that. So why a museum like this in Evansville? Evansville was the most productive city per capita for war goods and materials of any city in the United States, from December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, to VJ Day on September 2nd, 1945. The museum is basically set up into 5 different galleries. There's a home front gallery where we talked about the companies and the different organizations and places that did things contributing to the effort. Then we go into the main gallery, and this is the big hangar part. This is where you would see a lot of those things that were made. Then we swing around and we have a heroes gallery, and that would be, of course, about the people in the branches of service that they served in. Then we have a special gallery right now, which is a floating subject. Right now, it specializes in talking about World War I. Someday down, we need to keep the museum fresh. So 3 years from now, you don't say, I don't need to go there. I saw that 3 years ago. We don't want to have it. We want to have it change all the time. I never know when I walk in there what's going to be there. There's a lot of times where you have new exhibits moving in and out quite a bit. And then the last thing we talk about, the community gallery. We started talking about the businesses that were in the community. Now we're going to swing around and we're going to talk about the Red Cross Canteen and the USO, about how the community was affected or impacted those 2 organizations. So if we start in the home front gallery, we've got some businesses that changed what they were doing, and we've got other businesses that were created from scratch. And then we also want to talk about how the workforce changed at the beginning, from the beginning of the war to the end of the war. So if I just talk about some of the companies that were converted, Chrysler was making Plymouth automobiles before the war, 275 a day. And all of a sudden they became experts in making 45 caliber and 30 caliber ammunition and reconditioning Sherman tanks. Now if that's not a little bit of change, you know, that's pretty radical. But to give you an example about the 45 caliber ammunition, basically used in the Colt 1911 pistol and in the Thompson submachine gun. Okay? We made 3.2 billion rounds of 45 caliber ammunition and another 500 million rounds of, or 500 million rounds of 30 caliber ammunition. Those were used in a carbine. But if I said we used 3.2 billion rounds of 45 caliber ammunition, that was 96% of all the 45 caliber ammunition that was used in war. So that's what that meant. But then they didn't only make ammunition. Chrysler, you know, tanks and little bitty bullets are very similar, right? No, they're not. And, you know, and these are the same guys that used to make a Plymouth, okay? So they had the people, they had the know-how, they just did an awesome job at that. So they reconditioned over 1,600 M4 Sherman tanks. These were ones that were worn out in the United States just by training in them. And they wanted to rebuild them, they wanted to recondition them by building up the armor and doing some special things with the M4 Sherman tank. You had to watch out for it because its nickname was the Ronson, named after the cigarette lighter. And if I'm riding around a tank, I don't want to be something named after a cigarette lighter. It caught fire easy. So that's just to give you an example of the diversification of one of the plants. If I talk about Servell... Microphone. If I talk about Servell, we talk about they made a lot of the planes, wings for the P-47. They made them for all of the P-47s, but they also made them for different other planes. Briggs, for example, just down the road from the Servell plant, made the wings for a lot of the Navy planes that flew in the Pacific. They have 6 Hellcats, they have 4U Corsairs, and some of the amphibious planes. So they went from making refrigerators to making aircraft wings. Okay, very similar, right? No. So here's an example of the plant where they were making a lot of the wings that was made by Servell and Briggs. International Steel, they made a lot of the metal pieces that went to build the LSTs. And the LSTs were built basically from the keel up in the shipyard down on the river in Evansville. If you're familiar where Wright's Hill is and where Meade Johnson is, okay, right at the foot of that hill on the curve of the river, right where Pigeon Creek comes out, that's where the shipyard was. Wabash Avenue is where the administration building for the shipyard was. So, but they also made something that were called Bailey Bridges, and that's what these are some pictures of. The Bailey Bridges, as we started to defeat the Japanese and the Germans, as they retreated so that we couldn't follow them, they would blow up the bridges. Well, we decided to conquer that problem by just taking our bridges with us. So we had these erector sets where we just basically field installed our own bridges. To date, the longest Bailey Bridge that was installed was across the Rhine going into Germany. So that was a very important asset for the city also. Hoosier Cardinal made a lot of the tail sections for the P-47s, and they were also instrumental in coming up with they were in the plastics business too. So in the plastics business, they were messing with acrylic plastics. They came up with a special invention called Lucite, which is a version of acrylic plastic, which was 17 times stronger and less crack resistant than glass was. So you went from these small canopies that these fighter planes had to these big bubble canopies where they could see, the pilots could see a lot better. It was also used on the nose of a lot of the bombers, and the bubble canopies where the machine gun turrets were on the bombers, that same Lucite was used there too. So all of that specific thing was invented just by the Hoosier Cardinal plant. Another one of the things that was a life-saving intravenous feed for the troops when they were wounded was Amigen. That was invented by the chemist at New Johnson. So, Shane Uniform Company. There's examples of nurses' uniforms. So, Anchor Industries, they made shovel covers, rifle covers, things like that, canteen covers, and things like that. So there was to get an E award is given for excellence or in efficiency of quality and quantity. And only like 3 to 5% of all the companies that made things during the war received the honor of getting an E award. There were 15 companies in Evansville that got E awards, and they got them 37 times. Some of them got them, you would get one every year that you did that. And some of them actually got it 41 through 45. They got 5 E awards. If the company got them, each one of the employees got a little lapel pin that was that little copy of that E award. So it was a big deal. But the production was just going crazy. We had a shortage of people. We had an unemployment problem before the war. We had 13,000 people working. Before the war was over, we had 90,000 people that were employed. Okay, now we talked about the places that were already there and how they were converted and what they were doing. Now we're going to talk about 2 major things. That this was basically shrub, sage grass, or along the edge of the river. There was no shipyard there at all. And here we are making ocean-going vessels on a river in the middle of the country. They didn't want it near the shores anymore. They wanted to move it in to where it was harder to get to. So you build an LST on the Ohio River, you go down the Ohio River, you go down the Mississippi River, you're in New Orleans, you put your landing craft, which is where they made the Higgins boats, you put your landing craft on there, and that sucker's ready to go to war. So, but there's a big part of it that we talk about in Evansville, in our museum, about the LSTs. We've talked about munitions and tanks, now we're talking about LSTs. If you haven't been, you gotta come see the LST in Evansville. It's a living museum. It's awesome. And they're great partners of ours, but they're a part of our story, but that's their whole story. And if you got kids and grandkids that enjoy jungle gyms, let them climb around on that LST for a while. You might just want to sit on the deck and talk to them when they come back. But so the LST, it took troops, it took trucks, jeeps, tanks. Tanks were down in the bottom for the ballast reason, for the so it didn't turn over, put them on the top and fall over. So they were taking all this stuff to the shore to fight the battle with, and then when they got done, they wanted to go back to get another load, but they didn't go back empty. They were either full of, first of all, that's how our wounded got back. And sometimes we've got pictures that show the deck of the LST, bodies laying elbow to elbow of wounded. And then down hanging by their stretchers, hanging like 3-4 high on the inside. But that's also a good way to get POWs out of the action. The LSTs were used to take POWs to England, so they could load up with more tanks and men and stuff like that and come back. But they never went back empty. So the P-47, it's like a flying tank. If you compare it in size, it's about the same size of the Japanese Zero. It's about the same size, wingtip and length, as a British Spitfire. It's about the same size of a German Messerschmitt Me-109. It's almost 3 times heavier because of the armament that it carried and because of the engine that it had. It was a horse. It had a 2,000 horsepower engine in it. First fighter aircraft that had to have a 4-bladed prop instead of a 3-bladed prop. So it was one workhorse. It had 4 machine guns in each wing. Each one of them with 250 rounds. So you got 1,000 rounds in each wing. If the pilot got trigger happy and held down the trigger for 21 seconds, he was empty. Had shot 2,000 rounds of machine gun bullets. I'm talking the 50 caliber now. That's not the little 45. That's the 50 caliber bullet that's big. It tore through airplanes like they were machete, like they were paper mache. So it was just, and it could also carry 1,000-pound bomb load and rockets. So that was a big part of the reason why it was so stout. And it was also tough to shoot down. Could take a lot of damage before it went out of the sky. The last thing I wanted to talk about in the home front, and then I won't spend as much time talking about the other areas, but the workforce had to change. Remember I told you we had an unemployment problem. Well then, and the only way we could get that done, most of the guys were gone. We had women came into the workforce and the African Americans came into the workforce to a major degree. But you think about all the problems that that's going to create for your city. You've got all these people working now. Where in the world are they supposed to sleep? I mean, you had some beds that never cooled off. Because as soon as one guy got up to go to work, the next guy plopped right down in that same bed. And so housing was a major issue. You know, food to serve them was a major issue. But without them, we couldn't have done it. So then if we walk into the main gallery, and I'm just going to give you some pictures here of what's going on in the main gallery. This is where the hangar portion of the building is. So you can see a lot of displays, a lot of old cars, Jeeps, trucks, ambulance back there. Some of the other things I'll talk about specifically. But that's how big it is. You can actually see there's 2 airplanes in there. Okay, that's an AT-6 Texan, SNJ-5. It's a Navy version of a trainer. This would be the plane that the pilots got their wings in before they went into the P-47 Thunderbolt or the P-51 Mustang or the F-4U Corsair. This is what they got their wings in, this plane right here. Okay, interesting. Some of our displays, I mean, a lot of these things I'm going to show you tonight aren't there now. They're gone. They'll come back someday. But that's the thing that's neat about it. We have displays coming in and out all the time. That's a 1915 Packard. And General Pershing from World War I, that was his private car. And that thing looks, if you saw it up close, you'd swear it's brand new. They did an awesome job of restoring that thing. But to be able to see his actual car is amazing to me. That's the first plane that the pilots trained in. That's a Stearman biplane. It was forgiving. It had heavy, it lifted real quick. So it got them off the ground so they didn't run through a fence or something. 1944 ambulance, Army ambulance. That's the real McCoy, you know. None of this stuff is fake. There's a lineup of different types of Jeeps. The one on the right-hand side is a weapons carrier. It's actually got a big 50 caliber, a real 50 caliber in the back end of it where you could stand up. That's a Jeep on steroids. It's bigger than the little Jeep next to it. So then we moved to the Heroes Gallery. And when we got the Heroes Gallery, I got an interesting story to tell you. Altus McReynolds, that is in the cemetery at Normandy, France. Altus McReynolds from Evansville, Indiana, was a part of the 101st Airborne. You know, like Band of Brothers. Okay, he was in the 501st. Band of Brothers was the 506. They were similar units. So he parachutes in behind enemy lines on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Actually, his unit captured like 300 to 350 Germans real quick. They were bringing them back to the shore. Remember I said the LSTs were going to take them to get them out of the fight? Okay, they were bringing them back. The Germans get word of it, so they start shelling that unit. And it was, as the captain of this unit of the 101st Airborne, it's his job to keep them together. So he put himself in harm's way to the extent where he got mortally wounded on June 7th and died on June 8th. He received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart. And we've got his letter. This is all the stuff that was his, that we've actually got. We've got the letter from Franklin Delano Roosevelt to his mother. We've got the pin that she received showing that he was wounded and killed in the war. We've got his carbine, which is the version of the Airborne's carbine, which has a breakaway stock, which is a real special gun. But we've got all his medals. We've got his footlocker. It's amazing. But that gives you a perspective of what he did. And then up on the top right-hand corner, we've got uniforms from all 5 branches of service, and we've got them from privates through generals and admirals. So that's just some other examples of some of the military uniforms. Here's a history. Here's a piece of history. Okay, the guy on the left hand in the middle, in the center, he's 95. He's on our board of directors. He's the most valuable thing our museum has. That's him when he was 21 on the right-hand side. He flew 118 combat missions in the Lady Jane number 27 P-47 that was made in Evansville, Indiana. To call him a friend is a privilege for me. He's an awesome guy. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about the special exhibit. The special exhibit is where you won't always find the same thing. Right now, it's talking about World War I. And there's In Service of Mercy. There was the Angels of Evansville. There were 60 lady nurses that were actually served abroad in World War I. And this lady, the archivist for Vandenberg County, is putting together a story. She made a presentation. We have educational presentations at the museum all the time, just like this to a group this size. We have some awesome educational things, and if you'll send me your contact information, I'll see that you know when they are and what they are. We'll send you emails on that kind of stuff. But she came out there and she talked. She said, now I know a whole lot about 30 of the 60. But she says, I'm going to give you my Emma talk tonight. 3 of the nurses that she talked to us about from World War I were named Emma. And she talked in such great detail about those. When she got done talking, matter of fact, I think about 75% of our board was there just to hear her talk because she's so good. I felt like I knew those 4 ladies. She just did an awesome job of that. So that's something there now. And right next to it is a display of Mark, I can't remember his name, James Bethel Gresham. He was the first soldier to die in World War I, and he's from Evansville, Indiana. And I could show you where his house is in Evansville, and I could show you his grave marker in Locust Hill Cemetery. But there's a piece in there that shows a Marine Corps gas mask from World War I as well. The Evansville Red Cross Canteen was one of the most famous Red Cross canteens in the United States during World War II. We served 1.6 million servicemen and women. They served 3,500 meals just in one day. But the reason it was so popular was we had 7 different railroad companies located in Evansville. And it took 4 days to get across country on a train. So this is and the people, it just wasn't how much quantity that we did, it was the way we did it. We've got letters that guys wrote us from Belgium and Holland and Africa and talking about, I was just sitting here talking to a guy and talking about this one awesome Red Cross canteen that I stayed in, and he says, but I don't remember where it was. And he says, the guy sitting next to him, well, it wasn't by chance in Evansville, Indiana, was it? That's where it was. He remembered it not because they had served so many people, but it was the way they were served. The guys felt like their mom or their sister or their girlfriend were taking care of them. It was a real soft family touch. When they didn't have time to get off the train, the ladies would carry coffee and donuts and hand them through the windows of the train. But at any time, we've got a picture of the first guy, Alan Ulrey. We've got a picture of the first guy of the 1.6 million that went through that canteen. But we've also got from the Red Cross, we've got a directory of all of them. that went through there. They signed it, put their name, where they were from, their branch of service they were in, and what their rank was, and any kind of little comment they want to make. One guy wrote it in crayon. He had, I guess he didn't have a pencil, but that was just a major feat, and there's some of the details about the Red Cross Canteen. The other thing was the community gallery. Oh, one thing I want to tell you about the Red Cross. Red Cross did not care who you were, what branch of service in, what color you were. They would serve anybody. Integration was the name of the game. There was only one other place in Evansville, and it was called the Spaghetti Bowl. They had the same concept. They were going to serve anybody. Matter of fact, they gave them a free spaghetti dinner if they were in there and in uniform. So, but now the USO, you know, it was a place where you would stay overnight. There would be cots and things like that in there. The USO would be the place where you would stay overnight. They would have name band, big bands come in and play and things like that. And so there was one for the blacks and one for the whites. So if you guys have seen, if you've seen those two buildings, it was a while back because they've been both torn down. But the one on the bottom, that's the old CNEI railroad station. And it was also served later as a community center, Mark? Is that right? It served later as a community center, a lot of dances there and everything. But the buildings are both gone except for the one on the bottom. Those 4 columns, they saved those, and that's now the 4 Freedoms Monument down on the river. They remolded that into the 4 Freedoms. That's the actual four columns that were in that building. Free sewing services. Mrs. Hudson, they called her Mom. She sewed patches on, she did it for 29 months. She sewed patches on uniforms, she hemmed guys' pants, she sewed up ripped pants, whatever. But her daughter heard we were doing the museum, and she gave us her sewing table and her chair. That's actually hers from Mrs. Hudson. So that's enough of my blurb. That sort of went over. So you guys get me excited when I got a privilege to talk about it. We're open, limited number of hours right now because there's not too many of us. There's